thank you all for coming again. Really appreciate your time with us, and we hope that yesterday was informative. Today is all about the content tab and programming. And I wanted to just cover something that Tyson Jess had asked at the end of yesterday. So I'll go ahead and move Sympholight over here into the window. So we were talking about 2 and 3 channel dynamic white fixture. So in this case, if you've got a 3-channel dynamic white fixture, then your best option is to use either the 2-channel fixture generic advanced option, or excuse me, 3-channel fixture generic advanced, or the RGB. Doesn't really matter which. With the 3-channel, Sympholight will not show you a like a warm white, cool white option. So in this, when you bring something into that 3-channel area, like we'll take a couple of these are dynamic white groups that I'd made. We can look over here in the properties window. Well, I don't worry if you're a little lost, Ivan. We'll cover all this today. But if you select your effect over here and slide down to where your color would be, there are different color profiles that you'll see here. If you click on this drop down, you can get generic dynamic white, which will give you some options here for warm white and cool white, specifically those named faders. So again, if you're using 3-channel, my best recommendation would be to use that 3-channel fixture, and then use probably the Pro Photo Color, and just assume that your red is first, green is second, and your blue is your third white. You can also see that in the scene editor too, and Ivan can show you some more about that a little bit later today. Tyson or Jess, any other questions about that? Oh, okay, cool. Does anyone have any questions that they wanted to pose real quick before we get started about what we covered yesterday? I don't know if maybe you came up against anything in your programming or your homework. Just wanted to see if we needed to answer anything before we moved on. So go ahead and unmute, hop on, tell us if you need to. Otherwise, we will let Ivan get going here with day 2.
All right.
All yours, Ivan.
Well, all right. So this is probably the bit that everybody's waiting for. So you've been looking at the setup tab, and I have a show file that I started working on just to get some content in there. And for your information, what we're working with here is a product that we call Media Wallpaper. We don't talk a lot about this right now, but it is out there. It is available if you want it. And that just gives me a 12 by 12 grid of pixels. I can show you real quick what that product looks like right now. It's got some diffusion over it. But if I pull that diffusion off, you can see just kind of a grid of pixels. I also have a 1-foot Pro Point. I also have a 1-foot Pro Point linear set up to graze that same sheet of diffusion, so we can look at how a RGB fixture versus an RGBW fixture behaves in the programming line. So looking at the content tab, when you come in, this is going to feel a little bit like a video editor. We have a lot of different ways of bringing in content. You can use generative effects, which is our strongest output and lets you build the best looks. And then we also have the ability of bringing in, somebody's got an open mic. And then we also have the ability to bring in graphics and video. And we can also create some scenes which feel a lot like creating a cue in a lighting board. I'll just start with kind of the overview of the content creation window. So why I had to reboot is we had this 3D view window and all we saw was gray, just wasn't quite rendering properly. This is where we will get a preview of all of the effects. For right now, you can see that there's a lot of different pixels in here. The one that we are going to worry the most about is this set right here. I have a small, these are all the same size pixel, but I have them in a different density so we can look at how that affects content when it plays back. The next area we'll talk about here is the timeline. So saying that we have sequences and each sequence gets its own timeline that you can apply effects onto. We have the effects library, and the effects library has several pre-built effects in it. It has a media library where we're able to pull in graphics. We have a scene library. And we also have source effects. Source effects are what everything builds out of. So a lot of these effects libraries are shortcuts, so you don't have to pull up source effects every single time. And then the properties editor, this should look pretty familiar from the setup tab. Most of what we're going to do is editing properties in this area. So we'll start with talking about the toolbar in the 3D view. So right now I have two different layers set up. We have the 2D layer and we have a 3D layer. You can have as many layers as you'd like. So 2D layer is where we'll spend most of our time. I'm going to hit this optimize view, which will zoom in to the extents of the project. So if I come out, it'll bring me back in, or if I zoom too far in. So this button will hide and show the effect rectangle. If I have an effect from the timeline selected, you will see that rectangle there. I can turn that off if I wanted to. With that showing, I have this move, scale, and rotate. When I do that, I'm able to change how that effect frame is drawn. Right now, if I hit play on this, you'll see that that effect frame does not fully cover the fixture and we lose those edges. I'm going to hit undo so that that goes back to how it should be. This next function is a very interesting one. You can take a snapshot of the output and program it into nodes to have an offline display. I'll show that a little bit later, but each node can handle two different offline images. And I believe when you do this, it's going to snapshot for everything at once. So you can't create a different snapshot for different output nodes. And then we have the snap to grid, so I can make it so when I'm editing these frames, instead of smooth scrolling, they snap to this grid that is set here. So that's 100 pixels by 100 pixels. Sorry, 100 millimeters by 100 millimeters. Generally, I will work with just no pixel snap. So when you come into this software for the first time, you will see just one sequence. It will say sequence 1. I've created a couple sequences now. So we're currently on sequence 5. It's going to show you every group that you made in this project. And as you add groups, they will get added onto the bottom of this list. Important to note, as far as priority goes, whatever's at the top is the most important layer, and it goes down from there. What that means is if I play an effect over the top of another effect and it doesn't have any opacity, then yes, if it is fully opaque, you're going to only see the topmost effect. So we have some effects that allow you to do alpha channeling, which will show layers underneath. That starts getting important for creating very complicated looks. Lets you make complicated looks pretty quickly too. So we have this toolbar. I will say new sequence. And we'll see we just added a new sequence, sequence 6. I can delete the sequence that I'm currently on. So I'm on sequence 6. It's going to ask me to confirm that. I will say yes. We're back at sequence 5. I can duplicate a sequence. So if I go back to sequence 1 and hit duplicate, it is going to ask me to create a new name for that sequence. And we'll leave it at that. So there are two very important names for sequences, the name and the identifier. Once we start getting into automation tomorrow, you'll understand why identifiers are very important. Just know that identifiers must all be unique, and the software will remind you of that if you try to break that rule. So if I say sequence 5, you can see that that box has outlined in red to tell me that there's something wrong with it, and won't let me proceed. So clicking the sequence properties gear will take you out of whatever you have selected. So if I have an effect selected, it's going to repopulate that properties editor. Could have. Yeah, sorry. There we go. It'll repopulate that properties editor with the properties for the sequence itself. This check mark is going to be if you make changes in a sequence, commit to live sequence. This you used to have to always hit that check mark before you moved away from something. Now it generally captures your changes, but if you're editing and you're not seeing those changes show up, hit that check mark and they will show up. And we have an undo and a redo button here. They have the same function as undo and redo up in the title bar. I can hit play on a sequence that will start its playback. Previous cue, next cue, I'll get to that in a little bit. This is a way of jumping around to define points inside of a sequence. Stop, stop set output, play selected effect, always loops. So if I click on this color wave rainbow effect and hit play here, to move forward, we'll see it focus on just the effect that I'm working with at that time. The big play button will skip past that selected effect and loop the entire timeline. Should. All right. Oh, and I'm jumping around in this timeline by clicking on this time meter bar up above. That is one of the ways to navigate through a sequence. Sequence playing, this just gives you the status of that sequence and the time that we are in it at that moment. So you can hit pause, see where you are, and we can add marks based on that position. Create effect template is a way of saving your creations. You can reuse it somewhere else in the program. Clicking that will immediately add it into the effects library and give you the opportunity to name it. Enter, and it sorts it by alphabet. Right click on that, we can import and export. So I can use this to delete an effect or track. Undo on that. Resize the effect to cover the group effect frame is for if you have moved or resized this frame out in the setup area. So if I move that object and we come back into content, click on that, you can see that this frame no longer matches. And actually, if I hit that button, nothing's going to change because I still didn't update the effect frame itself. So there's a very useful tool out here. I open up this group. So I was messing with the tight pitched group. I right click on it. I say resize effect frame and it will match it back to that group of light fixtures. So now from here, click that button. We'll see it line up again. There's a little drop down here where you can say selected effect, the track, or the full sequence will get updated. So if you've shuffled a lot of lighting fixtures around, you might need to come in here and go to each sequence and say, update the full sequence. We have copy, cut, and paste here. So when I copy an effect, I can choose to paste it, and I will select which track that it's going to paste into, hit paste, and it will go in at the space that's closest to 0 seconds. So if you want to make sure there's no gaps, you always do that. Otherwise, if I use Control V on my keyboard, it will paste where that mouse cursor was. And let's say that I wanted to get this red in here. just manipulating things around. So if I want this red, I can drag it around to any of these tracks. You're not locked in to a particular type of track. I get this dialog to squeeze in or replace. So I can press S on my keyboard, press and hold S, and let go of my mouse, and it'll drop in to fill in that gap. Same thing in this manipulation. So if I say replace, it's going to push the track out. All right. Copy and paste. I push auto preview selected effect, click on it, it will automatically start playing when I click on those effects. But just that one effect. Enable, disable snapping on timeline. So right now, if I grab this color wave rainbow, come on. Drag it around, you'll see that when I get to the edge, it'll snap in. Deselect that. Now it won't snap. Snap is very useful. I always leave it on. Follow cursor on timeline. If you have a long project and you're starting to have to scroll around to catch up with things. Let's see if I can get this to play for me. Oops, if you turn it on. So it'll catch up as it gets to the edge of that window. All right, so one of the other things that I talked about is we have this 3D layer and the 2D layer. So I'm in 2D, and we can put on our sunglasses, which will hide tracks from other layouts. When I do that, we'll see a couple of the tracks disappear because those tracks are associated with the other layer. I switch layers, and we'll see those other tracks. And then if your processor is really chugging, you can turn off those thumbnails. But generally speaking, you always want those on so you can see what's going on. One thing that I forgot to mention while I was up here in the 3D layer. So you can move around this view using these buttons up here. It's cumbersome, but you can do it. And you've got the zoom in, zoom out. We always recommend getting a 3-button mouse. The mouse I use is the Logi MX Anywhere mouse. There's many options out there. So I'm using my 3rd button to scroll around. In 3D view, if you push and hold Alt, it's going to move your head around so that you can get a side angle view. 3D navigation is a little bit tricky, but You can do that, and you'll see this cube will move with you to show you which way your head is looking. But that alt function, I will hit it sometimes, and you'll get a weird view and won't understand what's going on. You can do the same thing in the 2D view. Still treats this as a 3D space. Go to sequence 5. All right. So when I drag in an effect from the effect library, it's going to come in a default size. For example, solid color red, which I just brought in, that is a 20-second long effect. It has a name, and it has an identifier. So right now that identifier is blank. And what that means is it's unassigned. You're not going to see this show up anywhere else. If I give it a name, as soon as we start pulling up the identifier list, you'll see that name in there. Again, that's more for tomorrow, but just know that that's important. There are many different places that you can assign identifiers inside of this property. So right now, display name is solid color red. Its identifier would be target 1. That said, this identifier may not be the most useful one, although I believe that should give you the ability to edit the length of the. Sorry. Thank you for answering that question, Chase. Yeah, you cannot click on that cube, unfortunately. It doesn't do that. You have to hold Alt on the keyboard. And so other manipulations we can do on this, we can drag for length. You can also see on the edge here, we get a little fade in, fade out. So, and we can do the same thing here. And get that fade in, fade out. That property is also editable in the property editor. So we'll hit play, and we can see we slowly fade up to that red. A skip here, we slowly fade out. Generally speaking, for loopable things, we don't want that fade to black before we loop. So usually we're trying to make sure that this will just always loop cleanly. That's always one of the fights that you're having in this software, is making sure that an effect sequence ends at a point where it will cleanly loop without a flicker or anything like that. And you know, one of the big gotchas is you can end up with a little flicker just because there's that gap right there in the loop. So going back to the properties for this effect, we can see this length when I drag it out to 1 minute. You'll see that this is, you can make this very long, but it also adds a little millisecond portion on there. I will usually zero that out, especially if I'm trying to work with other effects in that same timeline, because those hundredths of a second can cause trouble in getting a good clean loop. So this angle, I'll pull up another pull up another template here. This is better. So if I play this color gradient look, we can see that there's a directionality to that motion. If I use angle and I tell it 90 degrees, it's going to rotate that effect frame for me. And actually, if I pull up this frame editor, you can see the handle at the top here, and I make that change. You'll see that angle update again inside. If you're working with a long linear frame, obviously you're going to need to resize it to fit the fit that long linear length, because when you rotate it 90 degrees, it's going to turn into that. Position is talking about the center point that the frame is set up, and size talks about how many millimeters that frame is set up to be. If I move this around, you can see the start time update. So that's another way if you're trying to specifically offset when an effect starts versus another one in this timeline, you can move that start effect. So getting a little bit into how these effects are created. Right now, we're seeing the source effect blended 2D color effect. This is kind of a overlying encapsulator of other effects. Right now, it doesn't have a display name or an identifier. It doesn't need one. But what I can do here is opacity. So I could make this 50%. And you can see that that effect dims down. If there was something underneath it, we would see that underlying color blend through. Let's make this match. I should probably tell you what I just did to make that happen. So delete this. You can have multiples of the same track, and this is how we start building complicated layered effects. There's multiple ways of adding effects into a show file. I can say create a track for a group, so I can say make another one of those. I can create a new track above, create a track below, create a track above. So when I right click on this and say create track above or below, it will create a new version of the track that I'm working with. So if I want another tight pitch, I can say create above. I can also tell it just to delete all empty tracks. Every instance of a track does take up some processing time. So if you are running into issues with efficiency, you can always hit delete all empty tracks. And that will clean up so it's easier to see what's going on and reduce the processor load.
Quick note about that. If you're doing this and you have multiple groups, like, let's say you've got quite a few groups, it may take a second for that to delete. So don't think your program has frozen, but you might even take like 5 or 10 seconds for that to completely go away, depending on how many tracks and how many groups are there.
It's good. It's good. Yeah. Sometimes there's a speed that this program wants to work at, and if you try to work faster than that, you can create a mess for yourself. So If the program looks like it isn't responding, give it a little bit of time. It can be doing quite a bit of database management in the background. So I will go back to where I was. Let's say create track below. And I have this gradient at 50% opacity. So I'll bring this blue in underneath, and you can see that that color mixes now. Go back to the color gradient, and we have some ability here to change how this blend happens. And who's on top changes what you're going to see here. I'll pick saturation. I don't know if that will do anything. This is always a bit of a game to figure out if it's going to do what you want it to do. But this is one of the ways that you can start creating effects that are pretty complicated. So again, this part of this blended effect, 1D to 2D color, that is another source effect. If I click on that list, you'll see everything that is a valid choice in that field. But we'll pull out, we'll keep working with this base effect. So the color gradient is where we can define what colors are part of this. So I'm going to create a new sequence so we get a clean setup here. And I'll pull this rainbow color gradient effect out again. Now, if I click this little notch here, I get the color gradient editor. So this one is pre-set up with rainbow colors in it. If we wanted specific colors, I can drop out some of these little color pips so that we're only working, say, with the corporate colors that we want. So say this corporation works in red, yellow, and pink. You know, just in that quick change, we have a an interesting, a new interesting look. And my video preview has frozen. Okay. Oh, that's why. Okay. So what just happened there is I didn't remember where I have those patched. I don't have 3 of these sheets, so I have, this is universe 1, universe 2, universe 3. So if I just move this color gradient down, we should see that output. There we go. And if we want, right now it is fading in between all of these different color points. If we want to have harder defined looks, we need to pull these color pips tighter. So now we can see that gold band in the preview gets past. in a tight sequence. So make this pink. Anywhere that you click in this gradient will create a new pip. So you can pick up colors that way. Oh my. As a lighting designer once told me, I'm very good at creating things that look terrible.
We don't agree.
Yeah, as I tell them in that situation, it's a bonus because it makes them look like the heroes when they come in and tell me how to do it right.
Well played.
So really, we're just inclusion, I guess. But as you can see, sometimes you have to play with this gradient to get to where you want it to be. And you can directly edit where this falls in the location, so you can do the math to figure out where the thirds point will end up if you really need a very smooth color effect. You've got this color hex code here that you can copy and paste between pips. And we also have this color library and gradient library. So if you've worked really hard to create colors that you want to keep, we really like this yellow amber. I can hit add. Yeah, we get that in, so I can pull this color up again as I'm working elsewhere in it. Or if we like this whole gradient, I can save this and say and I can bring in gradients. So if I hit that button, it'll allow me to import a file. Chase, I don't remember how to export a gradient to a file. Do you remember?
Let me double check.
Okay. Yeah, I know that we've done it before, but I just don't. We tend to hand each other full files, not gradients. Just working with gradients. Honestly, this is my #1 used effect when I'm working on a project. Is most people just want simple color chases like that. So cycles per second is an important one to remember. So right now, when I dragged this out, it was a 20-second effect. And we can see that that effect smoothly loops right now in its 20 seconds. But what if I wanted to have this happen at a different speed? That's where this cycles per second comes in. So right now, we make a cycle every quarter second.
A great secret to any type of looping effect here. Now, Ivan will probably help differentiate between an effect that is like a gradient, which is sort of continuous and has an ability to be looped, and other effects that are built more on mathematical principles, which are a little more difficult to get to loop. Any of these, the easiest way to make sure that you are looping completely is doing a little bit of math. So you can take the overall number of seconds and take 1 and then divide it by the number of seconds. And what you get in your decimal form will be the number of cycles per second to help you get that looping seamlessly. So it's a good cheat that'll keep you from trial and error and take you too much time.
Yeah, so like you can see, we get a weird jump now because I made this 70 seconds long. So now, what was it again, Chase? It's just the 70 divided by 1.
It's 1 divided by 70.
Sorry, 1 divided by 70. So that is our cycle length. The program will truncate after 4 digits,
But
it does actually keep that all in memory. Didn't like that. Anyway.
It didn't have you didn't have the
I didn't have the decimal point in
decimal in there. Yep.
Yeah.
It just decided it was going to make up a number for you otherwise. Here you go.
There we go.
Yeah.
So now
you have a nice move.
Yeah, we have a nice clean loop. A nice, very slow loop. Gradient width. If I mess with this, it changes how wide that is, so we'll only see half the gradient. I believe that should still loop. Yeah. But I cannot say repeat the gradient twice when I'm doing that, unfortunately. So the maximum value of that is going to be 1. So if you need a gradient to display twice, you are going to have to come in here and scrunch everything down and repeat this inside that gradient.
Ivan, per your question about exporting gradients, so you can import gradients directly as the Photoshop gradient file. So, in case there's branding or some sort of detail that is coming from, from marketing or something like that for your client, you can import that directly. As far as exporting them in that format, we don't export them in that format, but in the same way that Ivan showed you that you can export an effect, you can simply take that effect, export it, bring it into your new folder or your new file, and then you not only have the effect saved in your user-defined section, but you can also then save the gradient to your gradient file after you now have that effect. So a little more steps, but still possible to move them back and forth between files and also to take things from a Photoshop standpoint. And
again, you'll see this location here that has an identifier in it. If I give this an identifier, this becomes important later where I can, on the fly, while this is running, inject in a new gradient and change the color that is being played back. We use this trick in a little more simple form to do color pickers, is one of the main places you'll see that happen. So I can hit invert direction, which will change the speed or change the direction of flow. And then at the bottom here, I have fade in configuration and fade out configuration. You might see that set to empty in some of these effects library items. When I do that, you'll notice that I can't grab a handle like I could on this side. That fade is just simply not there. And you can see when I bring it in, it's going to be a default length of 2 seconds. So I can also directly edit that fade in, fade out instead of using the handles. As Colin was saying, this program typically has a lot of different ways of doing the same thing. And I can disable that too, so I don't even necessarily need to set that fade out to 0. I can just tell it not to execute that fade. I think that is the kind of very basics of the generative effect. The next part of this that we'll talk about is kind of the mathematical effects. So if I scroll down in this library, I'm going to see a lot of different things, but we're going to I'm going to grab this sparkle slow. Apply that to the wide pitch. So this is a mathematically generated effect. We can see that it is a colorized 2D intensity effect. There's a gradient that allows us to change the color of how it happens. And the colorized effect is simplex noise. And there's a lot of different modifiers for how this noise gets created. And this hasn't been pointed out. Anytime you click on one of these boxes, you'll get a little help dialog here that gives a brief descriptor of what each one of these parameters is changing. And sometimes you also will just need to play with this. So right now, those sparkles are happening fairly slowly. If I wanted this to speed up, I can increase that level, and now we see that sparkle has kind of changed to a faster strobe glitter just by a very small change. So when working with these parameters, you're going to want to work in small increments. I said we're working in this gradient. You can see that most of this is transparent, and we're only here at the very rightmost side of that gradient, choosing a color. Right now set for white, set it for red, we'll get red sparkles. And one thing to note is that the second color pip, though it is an alpha of 0, which means it's fully transparent, is actually white. And so you can see this color gradient shift towards white as it fades out. To help make these sparkles more intense, I'm going to actually want to set that to red also, even though it's fully transparent. A little hard to see this in the color preview, but the video preview is looking pretty good. But if I wanted this to be a little more intense, so I can play with these values and try to find one that helps. Right. So this is something that you can kind of descend down the path of madness, trying to get the right amount of glitter or sparkle as you change those values.
But and this, as Ivan had mentioned, especially for these that may be using words that none of us have any idea of, the explanations are pretty helpful, and obviously some of these, algorithmic and mathematically determined effects, they do take a little bit of toying with, but obviously we're going to go over, quite a bit here, but I recommend, there's a lot of power in this effects engine, so a little bit of time spent with it, and you'll find your way into to what you like and what you're looking for.
So we have that fade in, fade out happening right now. Need this to be, I need there to be more so that we can really see what's happening here. Go. All right. This might be a little bit hard to catch, but when we repeat, there's a little bit of a jerk. It is not doing so smoothly. And this is just simply a result of how this effect is generated. There's no way to make it smoothly repeat. So when we're working with this, we have to pull out one of our tricks. So I'm going to make this a little bit longer just to make it easier to see what's happening here. I'm going to use a function called cues. So to create a cue, there's this little thin gray band here above the first track. If I double click in that band, we're going to drop a marker. So to make a seamless loop, we're going to need 3 different cues. Q1, Q2, Q3. When I set up these cues, the biggest one that we're going to want is Q2. And this play mode of repeat instead of continue. So there's a couple of different things we can do with cues. We can just totally ignore them if we set it to continue. They'll just be there as a reference point. And as it stands right now, I can use these back and forward buttons to skip to different cues. This is helpful if you're referencing different parts of a long timeline. We can create buttons in the user interface that'll skip to different portions of that show. Great when we're testing and things like that. We can tell it to wait. So when we hit that, it's going to pause at that point until something tells it to go to the next cue point. So if we have other sequences that need to catch up with this one, we can set it up to pause and wait. And we can set up another type of marker that we can use to cause sequences to interact with each other. But the one that we're looking for is going to be repeat. So once we get into this Q2, once we're there, it's going to stay stuck in that queue. Now these, next and forward will still work, but we want it trapped in here. Now note, it still jumps, so there's a little bit more that we need to do here. We're going to say fade out regular will be crossfade. You do that, we're going to have a 1 second crossfade and still get a little bit of in and out, but so I can take this out time and make it 2 seconds long. And now When I jump to the end of that and we loop around, it's really not that noticeable. So that's one of the uses for cues. It's my most frequent use of cues is just taming these mathematical effects so that we get a smooth wraparound on them.
As Ivan was mentioning before, another great use for cues is depending on like times that we've used Sympholight for like experiential lighting, you know, so if it's in like a museum, or we've done things like in elevator lobbies for, you know, very tall buildings. We have a very specific show or timeline that is as maybe the elevator goes up and, you know, comes to the top and then stops and then is waiting to kind of come down to the next level to kind of recycle through. Cues are a great way to keep that all condensed into one sequence, but then activate certain parts of it. Wait is a great opportunity, you know, if the sequence needs to be stagnant, you know, for a little while. So those cues are great ways to kind of show individual portions of that sequence at different times. And we'll see tomorrow there's cue control in each of the sequence blocks in the automation editor, so it's pretty easy to trigger those on time, trigger those at the end of other sequences. They're very convenient.
And then one of the other functions that I can have here, if I right click in the gray part, I can add a trigger point. And you get this little blue marker here. I click on it. It's really just time and identifier. And this interacts with the automation logic. So tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more about how those can be utilized, but know that, you know, if I set this for 20 seconds, when I hit play on this timeline, we'll go past that trigger point, and it doesn't affect anything about how this plays back. But this allows us to, in automation, take an action every time we pass this point. And again, you know, this gets into ride automation and other things. I've used it to, you know, trigger when a random event gets calculated. So as we come up to the end of a timeline, we can randomly choose a new timeline that'll get played next. Let's see. So I do have, as I've been looking through this library, you do see some different categories here. If I collapse this all down. So we'll see color effects, color X effects, and intensity effects. Color X effects are specifically formulated for working with RGBW. Let's see if it'll even let me put that in. It will. Right. So this one has a specific white channel in it. I think is not getting utilized at all.
Yeah, the effects are pretty smart in Sympholight, so you can bring down things like intensity effects or color effects into, you know, you could put in a color effect on an intensity effect on a color effect, and Sympholight will basically decide what of that effect it can attribute to that group and the channels within that group and which ones it can. There are also methods for adjusting how the white channels are handled in RGBW groups as well. So quite a bit of power there, but mostly Sympholight will do that work for you.
Yeah, I'm gonna just add a 12 by 12 grid here of RGBW so that we can see it how it renders with the appropriate color type. So I'm just curious to see, take this. So I'm gonna just copy that effect. I'll paste it into type pitch. So these two. You can see it's a lift. This is very subtle, but you can see the left side is not rendering the same colors as the right hand side. So this is an RGBW fixture, and this is just a normal RGB fixture. Those colors are being rendered differently because it has a white channel to interact with. And intensity effects only affect fixture intensity, so they're going to just default to white. So here and say laser intensity. This is a gray gradient. I don't think I can even add color if I wanted. Oh yeah, I'll put color in. It'll let me do whatever I want. But sometimes when you're working with these, you will you'll run into ones that just don't do what you expect it to do. Let's see here. So the next effect type that we have in here is the media library. I have pre-imported a little fire animation. Let's see here, where did I? So I just found a kind of an open stock video of a fire effect, and so we'll bring this in and put it on that wallpaper. So when I'm working with this media library, I have the add media. I can add a new folder, or I can delete the selected item. So right now, I already have this imported. I'll hit delete. So we're going to remove that from the library. I'll hit add media. And let's bring in that fire. So in this import, kind of the native resolution that it's going to want to work with things is 720p. When you change that, things get a little weird. So target bitrate, when we bring videos in, it is going to re-render the entire video in its own special format. Just know that if you're bringing in large videos, that is going to take a long time. I've talked to our development team, and they've promised me they are working on making our software compatible without having to do imports, but that is in the future, and I don't have a timeline on it. But what I found is this 1000 kbps is usually just fine for most of our video displays. You can use custom and make it less, but I've found that you can get pretty undesirable video playback if you stomp it too hard. So I'll keep it at 1000 and hit OK. and you'll get a progress bar of it importing that video.
And Ivan, I think it's worth clarifying too. As we've recently been understanding with a project that we've been working on, part of that really long time or really long import process also has to do with the length of the video. I mean, even some videos that we've had that are 8K or something. Even though they're large, they do take some time, but what actually has a larger effect on it is the overall number of frames in the video itself. So we try to stick to videos that are looped, obviously, because that makes this whole process easier, and generally shorter. It's a little easier to get a nice, consistent use. So we have a couple videos that are, waving flags, or obviously some of the fires are great because it's the movement and variation differs enough. It's kind of hard to tell that it's looped. So those sort of things we gravitate toward when it comes to using this for content. Also, there is, and forgive me, Ivan, if I'm moving you a little bit forward in your process, but there is also live video input options for using like a video server. So in instances where direct video or routinely updated video is used, that's a good option, whereas we are sort of the DMX translation middleman, if you were.
Yeah, we've definitely done systems where you might put an Alcorn McBride player or some other video playback device into the input, and that manages all the playback. And once we get this imported, I can show you, video can look really bad. To be honest, it's a matter of making sure that it is clean. I always tell people to try to think more cartoony than realistic, because that's what you're gonna get. Yeah, we make a lot of products that have pretty tight pixel pitch, but we're not a video wall. We're not trying to compete in that sector. Okay, so that video has finished importing. And I'm just going to grab that video file and we'll drag it out like any other effect. And when I do that, it's going to set that video frame just tight in. And you're going to get weird effects when you do this. So our mission here is going to be finding the part of this video that looks good. Keep in mind that this is a 720p video that has been crunched way down now. So we're going to try to find just a little corner of that. And now we start getting something looks a little bit more like fire. We do have some minor manipulations we can do of this video. Looking at this black level, so we can take a lower percentage. I can say 2% or even 40%, and that gives harder edges to what we interpret as absolute black. You'll want this if you have a lot of kind of pixel shimmer where there's some like gray in the background. 10% was a little bit too much on that one. We'll back it off just a bit. Frame rate is a great one to play with. But I can also just stretch this. So it came in at its native length, which is, about 25 seconds long. So if I just stretch this, we'll kind of infill a little bit, but I can even change this frame rate. I can say, oops, not 150, I can say 15. And now we get a little bit of a slower playback. It's a little more rough and choppy, but that might be the effect you're looking for, and get a slightly better fire effect. We can gamma shift, so I can make the red really red. Probably too much. But we can try to pull out a color that makes this fit a little bit better. Or I can get rid of the red, and now we have green flames. So you can manipulate that and get different effects using the same piece of video. Things to keep in mind when it does this ingest, this file size gets really large really quickly. So if somebody sends you 20 minutes of video, that's going to be, a gigabyte or two of video in the background that the server processes and stores. So anytime you can reuse a video effect, that's a win for everybody. And at a certain point, if your file size gets too big, you are no longer able to export it as a packaged file. That's a big limitation that you'll run into. And when you do that, that means that anybody that works on that file is going to you have to send them the videos separately, and they'll have to do their own import and rematch video files. So right here, I got this library. If I had another video file in here, I could switch to it. Close that editor. And again, same fade in, fade out is here. If you're gonna have video that wants to loop, that is, I don't have any video editing ability inside this piece of software.
Yeah, but it is a good candidate for that looping function with cues that we saw before. It's a pretty handy way to do videos and also those other mathematically created effects.
Yeah, so we can pull off the same trick here. I can say repeat, crossfade. Now we get a crossfade, probably a little more noticeable in video, but it's a tool to help soften that repaint. And again, video almost never looks how you have imagined it to look. I don't know if I would call what I'm getting on the video preview here flames, but certainly looks interesting. So that's something to always be sure of. And Chase, just for you, I'll show off the live video source.
Excellent.
So I have a couple of webcams here. One of them isn't in use. So we'll take the webcam from my laptop and add it to the project. Just add a new sequence. Take this live video. Yeah, so you can kind of see me wave my hand in front of this video frame. And actually see more detail than I thought you would be able to. You can see the video feedback even. That's fun.
Something we like to tell our customers who use some of the media products and tracks is that your brain really can do a lot for filling in information. Obviously, there's a limit depending on how many pixels you have. But the further you can get away from something, the more you can understand what it is. So this is a good method in kind of thinking about what your content is going to look like. If you do end up with one of, using this to control something that's more media-based, the distances really help. So it's something to keep in mind to kind of understand how this might look. We've tried some of this stuff, on interior spaces where you can get 20, 25 feet away from the lights, and it's much more challenging to see, especially video-wise, what reads and what doesn't. So it's always something to keep in mind if you're considering video effects for your programming opportunities.
So ratio, I didn't talk about this in the other one. We can tell it to respect that ratio. You can see here the shape of the video coming from my webcam is not the same as the actual effects box, and so it's letterboxing up in the top and bottom here when I go to that fit mode, but I can tell it to stretch. And this one, it will completely ignore the original ratio, but I can also say crop, and it'll keep the ratio but zoom in to fit that space. One thing that I did want to show here is the very first one. This might be a little subtle to see, and you might want to play with this on your own at a different time. The pitch of your pixels does matter how this gets rendered. So remember that this is essentially a video frame, and that video is getting rendered in, and the pixel inside is kind of that sieve that you're able to see what's actually happening. So with this one, I have things nice and tight together. And what you kind of end up seeing here is some hard stepping on the edges. This pixel pitch, second one, is more accurate to the real life pixel pitch of the wallpaper product. And then this third example, I have things kind of exaggerated, where you see a little more smoothing between them. Let's see here if I can. I can switch between these, and I can show you what each one of these looks like on the actual output. Fortunately, I don't have 3 wallpapers. Yes, Skylar. So when I drew these, in here, I just used that create fixture matrix and use that drop down. So right now, if I draw, we'd get a 12 by 12 grid straight on. And if I tell it 50 millimeters by 50 millimeters, not 500. And draw that same thing. Again, we'll see that pixel pitch. See here. So if I've got this one playing right now, this going out, we can kind of see that steppiness. We can see that steppiness, especially kind of in the dead center of that dot. I'll flip to the exaggerated version, and we can kind of see that how that the different feel of it. So now we're looking at this box, and the playback feels a little softer. Again, this is probably something that you'll need to play with on your own to really see that difference. But I have had projects where video just didn't feel right, and we kind of resized this pixel map to spread things out or tighten it up, and that made the video match much better to the project. And I think Chase is answering you, Skylar, but yeah, when you pull things out of the library, you're not able to resize them. So this is one of the reasons that, yeah, why we use these generic pixels for the most part. One of the other ways we have of creating output content is using scenes. As I mentioned earlier, this is as close as you're going to get to feeling like a light board. So scenes are assigned to a group. So I click on that group, and then I will say create a new scene for group. When I do that, it gives me a list of every fixture in that group. I can choose to exclude that from this change. We'll give this scene a name. We can enter an absolute value or percentages. So that absolute value would be out of 255. Percentages out of 100%. We can hide or show the color picker. We can select all, and we can copy and paste values. So if I select everybody in the group, we see them in the editor here. Let's say 40%. This is going to feel a lot like application or LAS, Lighting Application Suite. And within this, I can select different portions. I'm using the mouse wheel right here to change those values up and down so I can scroll up. So I can commit that. And so we have this kind of blue and green happening. And I want to switch back to this timeline. So if I want to actually use one of these scenes, I do then need to pull it out. Right? There we go. Yes. So now that fixed look is there. I don't tend to work a whole lot in scenes. If Colin, Robert, or Chase wants to pipe in with any examples of where they've been used, the biggest one that I've used them for is where we needed very specific coloration per fixture, and we weren't going to be crossfading or changing or anything like that.
Yeah, it can it can sometimes be easy to it's sometimes an easier way to handle like single or double lines of, say, wash fixtures that want to be in different colors or different formats if you don't want to create the grouping instead. Like obviously, if you had every other or every third or every fourth, fixture in an effect, where you wanted to change one to one color and another to another color, you could do that with groups and solid colors. You could do that here with scenes. Another place we end up using it are places where we might need to bring specific channels up to have operation or functionality with fixtures that don't maybe have standard profiles. So you could actually use intensity channels in an array if you wanted to, and patch those to specific channels, for certain, DMX controlled devices that need, certain channels up and to operate in different modes. That sort of thing. So, it's kind of a tool at that point. But yeah, as Ivan had said, very specific colors, very specific sort of sequencing and queuing sometimes becomes easier here. It's just a little more tedious to set those individual levels.
I would expect that, like, if you have specific parameters of a moving light that you need to edit, that's where this is going to shine. My guess is movement or setting an effects wheel to a specific setting. This is how you'll do it.
I've also used this when you have like Celador fixtures from ETC or something with the non-RGBW array. Like, for instance, Luminetics fixtures have hue, saturation, intensity, stuff like that. This is where that would be executed.
Yeah. So again, it's a powerful tool, but most of the time you're going to be able to work in broad strokes and don't need that kind of specificity. So I'll start talking about source effects here, and then we'll keep talking about them. I'm going to start with a very specific effect because Chase and I just encountered trying to figure out how to make this one work for us. And it can be interesting. So this is cellular noise or Voronoi noise. It has a couple of different names. It looks really cool. It has some pretty interesting properties. The specific effect that we were trying to do is we were trying to recreate the glimmer of water. And this one's tricky because I had been trying to figure out how to get this one to distort another another effect. I'm trying to think through how to best present this. And the issue I was having is that I couldn't get it to interact with the underlying effects. So right now, this one is a gray gradient, and you can see we have black to white. That wasn't what I wanted to push. So let's this guy out, put this red underneath it. So you can see, as I was saying earlier, like right now, this effect doesn't have any opacity. It is just this effect. So one of the things I'm going to do, I'm going to take this and I'm going to pull that alpha out so we get some transparency. So now we get that red color coming through that noise effect. So this is one of the ways that we can start stacking and creating complicated looks. Now, Chase, I can't remember what my fight was with this.
Well, you were you were layering it over a gradient effect, and so I think one of the ways that we were looking at doing that was adjusting the gradient whites specifically, or the gradient blacks, to have different alpha intensities, so that you can kind of leave the overall alpha or transparency of the sort of Voronoi noise effect intact, and then the individual sort of dips in the gradient allow the color through below. I know that part of the reason for doing that was to try to get little flares and additions of the underlying gradient below it.
Yeah, I think one of our fights was, so this is one of the things that we ended up with, is combining different effects. So let's make our own. You know, that's in sequence 12. So let's go back to source effects. So this Voronoi noise is nice. It looks pretty, but we need to be able to do more to it than what I can do here. The only thing that I'm able to do is apply this, is change this to be a color or have alpha characteristics and show something else underneath it. And this is where you start really kind of playing with what's available here. So we have a bunch of different source effects. Close these up. So we have the color X effects, we have the color effects, and we have the intensity effects again. If I come in here and I start saying, layered 2D RGBW effects, for my sanity, I would just do this layered 2D color effect. I'm going to drag this out.
And by the way, the 1D, 2D, and 3D names are referring to how many dimensions they change the color in. So obviously the 3D color effect you can use in a 2D space, but it's not going to necessarily give you all of its abilities if you're not in a 3D layout. So just a heads up with that.
Yeah, near. So we're seeing this layered 2D color effect that I just pulled out. It has a little bit of something in it. And this is where the engine starts getting very powerful and be confusing and frustrating. So we have blended 2D color effect is kind of the first color effect that we're going to work with. And then we get this layered 2D color effect. And I can start picking and choosing. So I want particles. And those particles do things, so you can kind of see from that preview what a little bit of what's happening.
And the effect that Ivan just basically switched over to, so the way that the color is being dispersed, before it was a rectangular prism effect or rectangular tiling effect, to kind of create that sort of square, infinity rainbow. So now it's taking that same gradient and it's applying those colors to a particle effect. So it's displaying those via that sort of particle method. And that's kind of the way that these layered source effects work. With these, I think the best, for you guys to mess with is really just to try. And essentially what happens with the source effects, when you pull them directly out, especially if they're layered effects, you will have a number of options as you sort of select each color creation mode that you'll need to fill in. And so sometimes that can seem maybe a little bit daunting, but for the first couple times you do it, stick with it and just try to go all the way down until it has sort of filled in all the effects that it needs. And another good way to kind of understand how those effects are layered is by looking at some of the built-in effects in the effects library, many of which are already layered effects. It's kind of a guess and check method for a lot of how you are going to utilize these things. But we recommend just kind of getting in there and getting your feet wet and trying to see what you can make.
Yeah, this one I get kind of throws me even when I start delving into this area. It can it can get really frustrating really quickly. Where you doing me, I think I know what I want, but it's just behaving so strange.
So, and it's some additional information on what Ivan was doing there. In this color gradient, in this effect, he basically has a color gradient. And then he also has an intensity gradient that's layered over top of it. So the sort of the spiraling tiled effect is the effect that he layered over the top of it. And what he was just changing was the fall off gradient basically for the spiral. So, if you bring that black and red, dial a little bit closer together, or those two pips a little closer together, he would actually be able to create more of a hard line in between that effect. And so, now it's a little bit more like if Ivan, if you just move your ring or your horizontal rainbow out of the way there for a second, so you'll be able to see kind of what we're doing there. And so it's showing you there based on the alpha of each of those, the alpha level of each of those colors and that sort of spiral gradient, about how much of that color gradient that it's going to let through. So again, a lot of this is really kind of guess and check work. It's going to be, you have an idea about a movement in your head, and so you can use a lot of these base effects to create this these looks, get a little closer to them. And again, there's definitely going to be some trial and error, but I think you'll be pretty happy with what you end up with. And yeah, so source effects, again, that's probably not something you'll necessarily need to do. I think a lot of our programmers get what they need to out of the standard effects library and go in and kind of adjust it as they see fit. But if you really, are looking for a challenge, building things directly from those source effects is definitely for you.
All right. So I've covered a good overview of the effects library, the media library, scenes, shown you a little bit about source effects. There's a lot that you can delve into inside there. But generally speaking, I feel like the effects library is pretty comprehensive for 90% of what you're going to encounter, and you can create a lot from there. So even inside of this effects library, so like we were talking about the cellular noise earlier, if I pull out this noise rainforest, I can actually look and see, how this one was created. And I can see that it's actually using the same noise that I was using earlier. So I can look at this and kind of start to figure out, how did the original programmer work with that same source effect, and how is it being used. And just simply here, I can change how that effect looks and get it maybe more towards how I want that to get calculated. And I can just edit some of these own hues in here to start getting. Oh, look at that. I just made Picasso. Or maybe we got lightning bugs on an evening sky. That might be what somebody wants. So yeah, a big part of this is playing with the effects library when you have time, so that you can kind of get an idea of where can I go to modify to get closer to what's being looked for. So that's kind of a good cover of that library. I'm going to talk a little bit more about more properties that you can play with. So we'll pull out just a real nice color solid red. So you get a good red. We've already talked a little bit about length, position, size. We talked about this opacity, which lets other effects show through underneath. But sometimes we want one of these values to change throughout that playback. So even these simple things like position can become interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit this little keyframe button up here at the top, and it'll add it to it will add keyframing information to that effect. So let's add size also. So now I have 4 different keyframe values. I've got position X and Y and size X and Y. So the first thing we'll play with here is this size. So at the beginning of the sequence, we're going to have a size of 3,400 millimeters, and at the end we'll have 3,400 millimeters. But if I double click in the middle here, I'll add a new keyframe point, and I can change that to, let's say, 500. So now, through that playback, we'll see just that size start shifting. And so we can make that shrink and grow. And can take that same thing and I can slide it around. So make that 500. So we can. Now I'm just working with the solid effect. This doesn't have any soft edges to it, so we're seeing pretty hard steps happening here. And so recently, where I used keyframing like this was at a site that wanted a dot of color to start in a spot and spread across the entire installation. And this changing the size of that effect frame is what ultimately ended up being the solution for that.
And also the distance here that you were seeing between these pixels, if Ivan were to move this effect to the tightest, you would see this, be a little bit smoother. Obviously, that is effectively a graph. It's changing that position quite often. And another good thing to use, a cool thing we can use keyframing for is we can actually use it for to create a number or to change a number over time. So we can almost use a dummy cue list, or rather a dummy sequence and a dummy effect that's in a group that doesn't pertain to anything or that's moved out of the standard area, and use that keyframing information and that change of value to create moving numbers into the automation editor. So keyframing's got a lot of cool uses and quite a bit of power in both content creation and also automation.
I'll come in here. I'll show this cycles per second. So I don't know why it chose 0, but let's say 0.1. But so we have the ability, right? So I'm changing the cycles per second. So we have the ability of creating an effect that is going to speed up and slow down over time. Let's make this a little more dramatic. Sometimes with this keyframing, you do need to, commit and restart that playback to really see what's going on. But you can see here, we have speed up and slow down. This one actually reverses direction. Huh. So you can create very very complicated effects with using that keyframing. Again, just want to stress those identifiers are very powerful tools. We'll do a small demonstration here. I don't want to step too much into chases tomorrow, but
And when you see Ivan creating or writing in identifiers, it's important to pay attention to where they are in this stack of information, because you'll see that there are multiple places to enter those identifiers and even display names. So what you as a programmer will be looking for is, what is it about this effect that you would like to change, or what would you like it to do? And so based on where you are in that stack, you have different identifiers, excuse me, for different operations. So the one that Ivan is making at the moment, really what you'll be able to change about the effect when you connect to this specific identifier will be the opacity, because that is what's inside of that indent. If he were to go down to the next one where it says blend mode, he would be able to change the blend mode of that color, and that would be, that blend mode is very similar to Photoshop blend mode. So it's, how that color might affect another, or how that color effect may change another effect below it. The one he's typing in at the moment, he'll have access to the direct color itself, the value. And so it's very important to kind of look into each of those effects and see exactly what it is that you would like to adjust. And that will help you know where or which identifier to change and which identifier to use.
So yeah, as Chase said, I came through here and added identifiers into 3 specific places. One of which will get me access to the opacity. One which will get me access to the blend mode, and one will get me to the color value. Again, not to take too much Chase's thunder, I'm just going to flip over to the automation tab and show that you can bring these properties in and set them. So now that I have those targets made, I bring in this get property, you get a really long list. So one, it's important to even know that what you've named these. So if I say color pick,
also you can type in a letter, and that will start to will filter down the list, so that can make that a little bit helpful, or a little bit faster. But if you definitely kind of think through your nomenclature for that, so that it's clear to you what it is that you're trying to get a hold of.
So like I know I named those SQ15. So if I type in here SQ, that starts filtering that list so I can find them quickly. So I can say opacity shift, and it'll give me all the different values. So these are just retrieving that value so that I could do something with them with all the other functions here on this page. I will just play with set property right now. And these are temporary things. If the system resets they're going to go back to what they're originally programmed as. So let's see here, capacity shift.
And to give what Ivan is doing and the area that Ivan is in right now a bit of clarity to anyone who's not quite sure what's going on. So we like to think of the automation workflow designer, which is the sort of sub tab that Ivan is in here in the automation editor. We like to think of that as the place where we connect the content to the user interface, and also where we schedule and adjust or interact with the content that has been programmed. And so these squares that are being pulled out, we call them blocks. There are many of them. There is a very comprehensive explanation of what each of them do in the manual. So always, if you ever have a question, the manual is a great place to find details about that. I don't know if we mentioned this yesterday, but you'll find the manual under the help file. It is downloaded with every copy of Sympholight that's on your computer. So you will always have that. You don't have to connect to the internet or anything. It should just open up. And it's a good resource. It's also quite well built as a PDF too. So you can go through your table of contents, click on your page and go right there. It's a searchable document. So it's very easy to find what you need in that manual.
So I'm not trying to cut into too much of tomorrow here, because this is a subject that really ties how all this stuff goes together. But for right now, I have this very simple setup here. So I can see that we're getting an opacity of 0 back. I can see that this input is 0. So if I force this value to run, which will just put that value into the opacity, we'll see that that goes to 100 and that opacity comes up. So if I go to output, again, this is an area that we'll talk about more. I hit play on sequence 15. And I go back to automation. Right now it's at 100. If I run that, we'll see that that preview turned off. This output went dark, but sequence 15 is still playing. Set it back to 100. We see that come back. So that is the power of identifiers. Is I have the ability to take all these values and start playing with them using those automation tools. And if you have further into the script library and all of that. So things get fun pretty quickly.
But should we talk a little bit about mutual exclude groups?
We should. So something that I can quickly show you is we've been creating a lot of sequences today, right? Sequences do not automatically replace each other. So right now, I have 5 different sequences running, and if I hit stop on sequence 15, suddenly we'll see what sequence 14 has, and sequence 13, until we get to everything turned off. There is a way to set up all of the sequences to replace each other. So I'll start at sequence 1 on this list. And that gear. And for the sequence itself, sequence 1 identifier, and then we have this mutex group ID. So the long text of that is mutual exclude. Anything that has the same group ID will automatically replace another sequence. So if I set sequence 1 to be in group 1, here, and we'll say sequence 1 copy, we'll also set that to be in group 1. And it automatically assigns its own index number. You don't need to worry about that. Anything that gets in there will automatically get. It's a unique index. And I can keep going, keep adding to this group. Again, one in group 1. Colin showed you a faster way to do this yesterday, and that's through the bulk change. So if you've gone through, created a project, and you've created a lot of new sequences, you can come here into bulk change and come to sequence and select all of these sequences. Note, quick, so see how we have this sequence 1 copy? Note when I open up this bulk change and come down here to the sequence list, we do not see that name. So this is referring to these sequences by their target ID, not their common or identifier, not target ID, identifier. But so here I can select all those sequences, and now I have the ability to edit, group edit any of those properties. So opacity, anything like that. But so if we're looking for this mutex group ID, I can set those all to 1 and hit apply. So now, after making that change, come back to this output tab. I can hit play, and I'll see these crossfade in between each other.
You can make a good case for multiple mutual exclude groups when you have multiple locations of content, especially multiple locations you play content on that is different. So if you have some canopy lighting, some facade lighting, some crown lighting, you can have different groups so that you can play multiple effects on those different locations and still allow them to play at the same time. We'll also see tomorrow and also the next day with some of the mutual exclude control blocks where you can stop entire groups. With this mutex system, we rarely create a stop button. Some customers like it, some don't. But the nice thing about it is it saves you a lot of effort and time in creating your user interface, because you don't have to think about the logic to say, okay, well, when this button, plays this scene, it needs to stop anything else that's playing. It kind of already takes care of that for you. So typically, I would say 80% of our projects use just one mutual exclude group ID. The other thing to note, I don't know if you noticed as Ivan was changing that, by default, they will all have group 0. Even though they all have group 0, that's basically a null value. So you need to set it to something, likely 1, until the mutual exclude group magic sort of happens. So, one could say, hey, well, they're all 0, but that still needs to be 1 to be activated. So something to think about there.
Yeah, another place that we just recently used, timelines that would be in the same zone, like overlapping each other, is we did a baseball stadium where they wanted to be able to play sequences that would layer over the top of everything, that would take over for very short periods of time, say when somebody hit a home run or there was another event on the field. Somebody makes a double play and they wanted to play a specific lighting sequence for that, but return to what was originally happening underneath. That's when you could use a different mutex group so that when that interrupt plays, it doesn't stop the underlying effects. You just have to be aware that when that happens, your groups need to cover each other up. Just because they're in different mutex groups doesn't mean that, if I have something in real pitch and I have something in wide pitch into, this is in mutex group 1, this is mutex group 2. Whatever's happening here is still going to be happening. They don't just automatically blank each other out.
This is another good way to do, like, let's say you have a lobby with an effect that has, like if you do, let's say a multi-hour queue, like a 12-hour sequence or a 7 or 8 hour sequence. And, you'd like to have some change from sunrise to sunset, and you have a sequence that plays between those hours every day. If you want to do something on the hour, if you want to do something on the half hour, if you want to have a scene that maybe shows, like if you're doing something circadian rhythm style, if you want to have a test scene or a show off scene for the customer to say, hey, oh, check this out, and press the button, and it takes that same gradient that's happening over 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 hours and plays it in a cue list or sequence on top. That way, that can happen over 20 seconds. And then when they show that, oh, that's really cool, it goes back to exactly what it was doing before. We need to worry about, we've stopped, that sequence or that cue, or rather, excuse me, the sequence that's running over the entire length of the day. So it's great for those blending necessities, but it's also a great way to kind of save yourself some time.
Let's see here. One other thing that I didn't touch on while we were looking at the media library is you see this button for Get Video Converter. This links to a tool that makes some changes in the background. I'm going to pull the manual out here real quick. So again, this is talking about bringing in videos, but basically when you download and install that tool, the free video FPS converter, it's going to use that tool in the background to help you with keyframing. So when you add keyframing there, you can speed up and slow down a video, and it's going to use that video converting tool to make those changes. When you download and install it, there's actually nothing that you need to do to interact with it. It's just a helper tool that gets used in the background.
It is an external software. It is vetted by EQ, and it is obviously available at that link. You'll see that link the first time you download this program. After you click it for the first time, it will go away because that will already be installed on your system. And as Ivan said, whenever Sympholight needs it, it will trigger it, open it, do what's necessary. And this is what it looks like.
That's what it looks like, but yeah, it just doesn't. There's nothing that you need to do. It's using it for its magic. So again, I have not been naming sequences as we go along, just to be moving quickly. But when you're working on these files, please do give your sequences display names.
And it's definitely a very, if you have, or if you're implementing scheduler, it is a must, and those should be as clear as possible, because when you use scheduler, when the scheduler program is interacting with Sympholight, it'll be referencing those identifier names, and that'll be a customer facing name. So we want to make sure that those are clear and make sense. It just makes it easier for the customer to know what they're scheduling in that interface. And also, this is similar to Symphocities, and which basically Symphocities is kind of our own application that runs alongside Sympholight and gives you a much more interactive user interface, and that is again referencing some of those internal details. You know, for organizational purposes, it's really helpful. My best practice for this is that whatever I want the display name to be, I also make the identifier. Those can be the same, and actually display names can be the same across your system. It's only identifiers that have to be unique, but I will take a display name like Ivan is doing. I'll copy it after I type it in, and I will paste it into identifier, and that is my way of doing it. It's helpful because it kind of takes care of it all. And I typically do that toward the end. You know, obviously you might change things. The customer may want to change up certain effects and things. So, you know, I'll try to do that kind of midway through. Usually, you know, when I start in the automation editor, but sometimes I'll go back and I'll leave it till the end, depending on how good I remembered which number was which. So, and as we kind of mentioned, it's good practice if you as a programmer ever have to send this file off to somebody else, if it gets serviced by someone else a couple of years down the road, making it as clear as possible is always a good practice. And I don't know if we talked about this directly either, but you'll see, I haven't scrolled past a number of different fade-in modes and times. Obviously, there are fade-in times for sequences. And so you'll notice right now, if you look on the timeline, the teal, or whatever we're going to call that, effect is not highlighted in yellow. So right now, what's being shown in the properties window is the sequence itself. If he were to click on the effect, then he would be changing the effect properties, which shows something completely different, as you can see. So in the effect itself, or in the sequence itself, you can change where the fade in and fade out times are, and those are the specific times that will indicate how, with using mutual exclude groups, how long or short of a time that the sequences fade in and out of. And that's both in your mutual exclude group operation and also in your like button press, if you have your action pad or your glass touch or another user interface. So those are adjusted there. And then there's also the cue skip, cue fade in, and cue fade out. Those are not important unless you are using cues to start certain parts of the sequence in a different order. Then you can change essentially how the fade modes are between going back and forth between cues within that sequence. And Ivan, did you talk about, forgive me if I missed it, fade loops, like a repeat from a specific point or a loop segment?
I did not talk about loop segment. We talked about looping and using cues to do looping, but yeah, I didn't talk about the loop segment itself.
So if another loop segment has like similar uses for playing portions of sequences that the cues do, but it's a little more basic. Essentially, what we're saying is that if the loop segment enable button is clicked and we've got a start and an end, obviously you can see start is in green and end over there is in red. once you have started playing the sequence, the cursor will pass the start loop, and then it will stop at the stop loop, and then when it begins to repeat, it will repeat wherever the start loop is. So what we have, like sometimes if we do something unique with a fade, if we have a dynamic effect at the beginning of a scene, or of a sequence, but then something static at the end, this is a good way to not have to worry about how long that fade may be, when changing between scenes, but instead, it will allow you to kind of segment whatever it is that's playing. We also found this in sequences that have multiple parts as well. So this is another tool for you guys to kind of customize, how a scene or a sequence may be working on one of your job sites. But I think otherwise, Ivan, I think you covered everything. Go ahead.
Well, I want to point out one more thing. So most of what we've been doing has been in RGB color space, so I haven't been too worried about this. When you come into RGBW lighting fixtures, the normal way that we're going to get the white chip to come on is through a calculation that the software is making for you. So you'll see this color to RGBW 2D, and in here you'll see the white channel is color conversion, and it is going to average red, green, and blue and divide it by 3 to come up with the intensity level for the white emitter. And sometimes this can be a little frustrating, and you just want more direct control of it. So basically, because anytime I just bring up red and green, suddenly we're going to have white come on with it, which may not be what I want. So there's 2 effects that you see in here right now. Right, this is an RGB effect. If I look at the template solid color white, don't pay attention to that name. It inherits the name from whatever it is in the library, but once you change it, it can become that. So I have changed the effect that we're playing back from color to RGB W2 now to solid RGB W2D. And when I do that, it changes what I'm allowed to access in that color picker. Now we can see we have the red, green, blue, and we also have a white channel control in there too. So that can give us a little more specificity over what that fixture is doing. Because in this instance, now I have control and can bring up just the white emitter. And this looks kind of gray black here, but in video preview, you can see that just that white emitter is up.
And these different color styles can be achieved. And also, Ivan, can you go back to your color solid blue effect over there? If you select over where it says color conversion, there are also some other options. So you can drop that menu down and you have a couple different versions, average, formula, offsets, color conversion, you can have it off completely. So offset obviously will, when you select that, the white offset information 3 or 2 boxes below becomes realistic. When you select the formula, you can change the formula right there, so you can make your own if you'd like. So there's a lot of flexibility there for that, those RGB colors to RGBW. to give you a sort of, depending on how you're going to set your colors, sometimes this can be more valuable, depending on the color information you may be getting in from, programming or otherwise. So, there's a couple of reasons for maybe using this. We also have some profiles in some of our lighting fixtures where this happens automatically. So it's important to know what you're talking to. Those are usually changeable via RDM, but it's important to know kind of what is happening within the lighting fixture itself. But we specifically pay attention to this when we dial in colors using the color picker, because we want to be able to directly control that, and we have a couple solutions that do use scripting and don't use scripting to try to make this a little bit easier to deal with in the back end of the software. Robert, were you gonna say something? I saw you came off of mic there. I wasn't sure if you were about to say something.
No, I'm good.
So yeah, good catch, Ivan. An important one to mention.
Yep. Yeah, that color control can be a little bit daunting. Yeah, and especially it is important to note that some of our fixtures are doing this color conversion internally, and you need to know whether to turn that color conversion off by setting it into a different mode, or just settle with it and know that your color conversion is going to go through another color conversion, which usually is fine, but if somebody starts getting really specific about colors, you can end up with dramatic swings unexpectedly.
Thanks for spending your time with us. We appreciate it, and we know it's hard to give up, so we hope that this has been really helpful.